So, panelists, thank you again for being here. Um, I think I just want to say with all of our questions tonight, of course, please feel welcome to share what you feel comfortable with. That goes for panelists and everybody here. If possible, let's try to share examples and details that kind of help illustrate your experiences so that our audience can get the most out of this. So thank you again for being here. Let's start off with maybe some introductions. We can just go in the order that that you all appear on the slide. And maybe you can share your name and where you work and just kick us off with intros. Annie, you want to get started?
Sure. Hi, my name is Annie Kiley. I work with Lauren at Viget. I'm an application development director, which means I'm a backend developer and a manager. So at Viget, I'm still 80% like a direct contributor, and then I also manage for the people on our development team. And yeah, I've been building web apps in this industry for about 10 years, and I love it. And I'm really excited to be here. This is a very cool event, so thanks for putting it on.
Thanks for being here. Yeah, I think that's great. And if the rest of the folks here want to share how long you've been in the industry as well, that would be awesome. Diana, you're up next.
Hi, I'm Diana. I am a software engineer at Cofence, where I work on PhishMe, which is a phishing email simulator. I am a backend engineer, and I have been in the industry about 2 years now, though I've been in and out of tech or STEM since college, which was a long, long time ago. So I'm excited to be here as well.
My name's Elliot. My pronouns are they, them, and he, him. And I've been in software for 6 or 7 years. Half of that time has been spent perceived as a woman, and I am non-binary. And I currently work as a senior software engineer at a company called Propel. We work on technology for low-income Americans, namely the application called Providers. And I specialize more in front end. I think that is it for me. Pass it to Teresa.
Hi, I'm Teresa Swartout. I was in the industry working for over 30 years. I retired a little over a year ago. I worked almost exclusively technically on submarine software for the most part, a lot of other things thrown in. My last job was working for a company that develops autonomous driving systems. So that was a little different than the submarine world, but a lot of fun, a really great company that I worked for. So it was a nice way to end my career. I've been with Code the Dream since the fall. I volunteered and I've really enjoyed working with everybody. It's been a nice little thing to do in my retirement. So I've enjoyed it. Glad to be here and talk to everybody.
Cool. Thank you all so much for the intros. And so I think I just want to kick it off with a pretty general question and kind of set the stage for the topic we're going to tackle today. So if you guys could tell me a little bit about the role that gender has played in your career, that would be awesome. And that could be for you personally, or, factors that you've seen influence your career path, or experiences that you've had in your career. That would be wonderful. And let's stick with you, Teresa, since you left us off with intros. What do you have to say on that topic?
So one thing, and I've mentioned this to some people here at Code the Dream, when I graduated from college in 1984, my graduating class in computer science was about 40% women, which there was an article in the Post probably 4 or 5 years ago. That was the peak of women in engineering, was 84, 85 when I graduated. So when I hired on with IBM, when I went into my first job, I actually had a lot of women that went with me. So it was not me being the only one. Senior developers, probably more men, but as far as entry level, there was a lot of women, more so than I think you see today. So that was interesting, I think. I think things have shifted since that point for whatever reason. As a whole, obviously all of us have worked with majority men, but as a whole, I would say my experiences have been way more positive than the negative. Of course, there's been negatives, but as a whole, being a woman in the industry has been good. I feel like I've brought a lot of different approaches to problem solving. And of course, I think we generalize a lot of this. And one of the things that I mentioned to Lauren too is that we don't want to come in and this be a male bashing scenario forum. I mean, I think you go into things trying to understand everybody's viewpoint and how they're approaching problems and issues, and not assuming the worst. But like I said, for me as a whole, it's been a great thing. I've had very few issues. Of course, had to work around a few. It was great as I was raising my family. All the companies I worked for, even though I worked for large defense contractors, all of them were very accommodating as far as working part-time. When my children were young, I just got a smaller piece of the project to work on. So I always felt like they actually did a very good job of accommodating issues that we'll talk about, I think, as we go along, like all of us. But so my time in the tech world has been great, and it's nice to be here.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing those things. And I'm glad to hear that it's felt like being a woman in this industry has been something that has been a positive experience for you and something to be celebrated, not something to necessarily be framed in a negative way. So I'm very happy to hear that. Elliot, would you want to tackle this question next? I'm especially curious. You mentioned experiencing part of your career presenting as a female and now presenting as non-binary. I'm wondering if you can just tell us what that has been like. Tell us a little bit about your path.
Yeah, absolutely. So to Teresa's point of computer science graduates, and that year 84 is the highest that we've had graduates in comp sci. And so around 30-40%. Myself going to school in 2014, my school was around 16% females in our department, and nationally, I think it was even a bit lower than that. And so that dip happening since that time and kind of the shift through marketing and different things, access to technology and that sort of thing. I definitely experienced the other side of being in the gender minority and being in classrooms of could be, myself as the only female presenting person, or can count on my hands the number of other students or other coworkers who look like me. And I definitely also, as a neurodivergent person, had a lot of challenges in my career early on because my communication style is very direct, and I'm not always like very warm and fuzzy when you first meet me. It takes a while to kind of open up. And so it wasn't very acceptable behavior coming from my perceived gender versus that behavior coming from men. And so had lots of conflicts with people, and that coming from like gender norms and what was seen as acceptable. And so it was really interesting for me when I started my gender transition. I was actually employed at a company for the duration of that, where I got to see a shift in how people were interacting with me. And so there was, of course, the challenge of getting people to use my name and my pronouns, but there's also conflicts and situations that I was having with people when I was female presenting, and not having the same situations come up as my gender expression became more male oriented. And just that shift of like, wow, like that, how I'm being perceived in terms of my gender, how my voice sounds, all of that is actually changing how my behavior is perceived, even though that behavior hasn't changed at all. So I've had a very interesting relationship with gender throughout my career and how that has influenced things. And that's just kind of the short of it there. So.
Thanks for sharing that experience, Elliot. I really appreciate that. Diana, do you want to tell us a little bit about your just general experience in the industry?
Sure. I was thinking about this, and I feel like it goes back to school age days. And when I'm really thinking about how gender has influenced my experience, I think I'm really only at the tip of the iceberg because I don't think I set out in the world assuming that people were perceiving me a certain way and treating me as such. So even though, I mean, I think recently, in recent years, especially in the tech industry, like there's been great strides in more gender equity. But when I was in high school or in college in like the mid 2000s, I was the only girl who was a chemical engineering major in my entire class, and I think up until then, maybe like junior year, it was like this fun feeling of like I beat stereotypes. I'm the only girl, but like then you realize later that's not a good thing, and that you don't, and you need the camaraderie, and then yeah, there's no way of knowing whether someone's reacting to you because of you or because of your gender or because of some other intersectional mess of ageism or any racial bias. So it has just kind of gone in and out of how I have to learn to view myself from other people's points of view. As far as how I feel like it's affected me in tech now, since I've only been in industry for 2 years, I'm kind of back to school. I'm the only female developer on my team, but I have full confidence. My manager is great, and I think he's employing the best practices he can for hiring, and so I'm confident he'll make a change if the candidates come and apply. But it's just still that feeling of, oh, is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm new? Is it because any other thing? So I guess that's my roundabout way of saying I don't really know. It just left me with a lot of questions of, it's all mixed into imposter syndrome, right? Like, am I the token, woman here, or did I get here in merit? And then who am I being compared to? So just, it's a lot of questions.
A lot of questions, and a lot of what these questions you're asking, I think, are the questions that the folks in our audience have. A lot of what you just said, I definitely saw reflected in the questions that we heard from the RSVP form and the things that people are interested in hearing about. So I can definitely appreciate and sympathize with a lot of those things. And I think, yeah, we're asking those questions. We're in it together. Annie, I'm curious of your experience. I think we've heard from a few people who it sounds like started their career in tech or in a related field. I would love to hear about your career path and especially your experience as not only a female engineer, but a woman in management as well.
Yeah, sure. I think, going back to school, and I didn't major in CS, but I majored in math and was just almost always the only woman in my class. And then after I graduated, I was a math teacher for a little while, which is interesting because it's a very female dominated field. After that, I worked at a math education related to nonprofit, and the nonprofit world at the time was also fairly like a lot of women there. And then I kind of stumbled on to coding and was like, oh, I really like this, and decided to make a career jump. And I did. And I've been, so that was, almost 10 years ago. And I've been the only woman on every team I've been hired to. Subsequently, we've like hired women who have like helped mentor and then have gone on, but I'm the only woman on my team now. And it's funny, the truth is I'm almost not sure if I know what role it's played, because this is just kind of how it is. And I would say most of my experiences have been overwhelmingly positive. But I don't know what I would say if I had like, oh, and then I like had this job and it was like half women and like there was a lot more gender diversity, and this is like how it was different. Like I have basically nothing in that bucket. So I'd say, I've loved my jobs. I've loved my coworkers. I love programming. I've had, overwhelmingly good experiences. Yeah, I think like you're all saying, like I do have questions. Like, what would it be like if if that were different? But yeah, as far as like just like the original question, like what role do I think gender has played? Yeah, so part of it is I don't know, because I don't know what that other world is like. But part of it I think is I don't think that most of the times I've had moments where I've been like, this has to do with me being a woman. It's a lot of first impression, a lot of assumptions, a lot of kind of, oh, like, are you the project manager? Like, no. Even, like last week I was in a sales call and, they were like, okay, Annie, and like, you're going to do the technical part. And I was like, okay, but like, just so you know, like there's some people are going to look at me and just sort of not think that I am like a very senior engineer. So but most of that stuff I find, like I said, it's like it's like that first impression, it's an assumption, it's that. And I find most of that stuff really smooths over pretty quickly. It's, showing up and doing your job or doing my job tends to me, like get me into kind of a positive space pretty quickly, and not always and not with everyone. But I try to think about it that way. And then, yeah, my experience at management is relatively new. I've been at Vigit for about 6.5 years. I've been a manager for about half a year, managing people who, some of whom are like I, worked with kind of prior to that, and now I'm their manager. Overall, I think it's pretty good. I don't think I've really noticed anything that would make me think that there's an issue because of my gender. But again, I guess like I don't know another world. So I would love, basically what I'm saying is I would love to know. I would love to have a lot to compare this to. And that's it's just great to hear other people's experiences too. So thanks for sharing.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, what you said about not knowing really resonated with me. I think we don't know, it's an experience that we probably have as women, that people have, if they are trans, non-binary, if, people of color, people from any background where you're not really sure what assumptions people are making based on various different characteristics that you have. So I think it's tough. It adds just a layer of complexity to our interactions with people, but it sounds like this has maybe not necessarily deteriorated too much from y'all's experiences in this field. So I'm glad to hear that that is the case. I'm curious because we had a lot of questions about career changing, as well as coming back to the industry, or maybe switching careers after a period away due to giving birth or becoming a caregiver, or just generally making a career switch. So I'm wondering what those of you on the panel, what kind of advice do you have for people who are coming back into the industry, maybe after a time away, or are switching careers altogether? Because I think that is definitely a large volume of Code the Dream folks, myself included. Why don't we mix it up and start with Diana on this one?
Sure. And I just had like kind of a career panel last night for my intro students. Having been a career switcher myself, it does take a lot of coaching yourself in selling the parts of yourself that you think will apply. And for the most part, I would say every job, a majority of your requirements are to be reliable and show up on time if needed, to be able to communicate and to work with people. And really, that might be the only two things: just show up and be eager. And so that really applies to any job that you may have had. And there's plenty of problem solving skills you can bring over. I know that, again, the communication skills, I think, come into play a lot, because product managers like to just know how you're doing with your code, and it's less about appearances. It's better to say, I'm not done and I need help, than to not say anything at all. Little things like that I think would help career switchers. But think I lost my train of thought. But basically, just own it. It's good to be different from everyone else. That's all part of the diversity that everyone should be striving for in their workplaces. I'm also like still heavily involved in a music group here, and I think the way my brain works, arranging music or singing, and feels like programming to me. Everything feels like programming to me, but I think it is often more of a plus than you think it is. So basically, don't sell yourself short. I'll just end it there before I keep rambling.
Thanks, Diana. That's great advice. I'd love to hear from you, Elliot, next, because I know you've been a Code the Dream mentor for a while. I think you bring a unique perspective to this. So I'm sure you have great advice that you're giving to Code the Dream participants all the time. But what advice would you give, to that group of people who maybe is coming back to the tech industry or switching careers, after some time away?
Yeah, so I don't have first-hand experience of this. However, what I've heard and read anecdotally is, if you have gaps or you've got a different career and you're transitioning into tech, working in the industry, skills are very fluid. And so I would recommend like tailoring your resume and experience to the new job or new career and pulling out skills from a previous job that could apply to that. And so like sometimes you don't realize how much of a completely different job actually you're doing skills that you would do as a developer or as a technologist. And so trying to pull out that relevant experience and then also highlight the experience that you're bringing from that different career. Like if you're coming from business or marketing or customer service, whatever the field may be, like that background is also its own type of diversity that is going to be a huge value add to any team that you work on, especially if it has direct relation to what that business is. And so being able to bring over that sort of cross-functional experience can actually be a bonus to your experience rather than a detriment that you're transitioning. So I'd recommend that. I would recommend finding companies who have larger support and kind of training structure in place, companies who believe a lot in growth mindset and educating their employees. That's going to likely be more successful fit for you. And then, the same thing for any gaps, whether it be from parenting, caregiving, health, whatever the reason may be, just own that as best you can and try not to. I think transparency is the best policy, unless it's something personal you don't want to share. And depending on the employer, if they're a really great employer, they won't even ask you about it, or if they do, it won't be in a negative way. So I think just that's some advice for how you can navigate that kind of transition. But again, I have not done it firsthand, so I can't say this is how I've been successful. That's just the best advice I can try to give.
That's fair. That's really helpful advice. I think not, necessarily dependent on one's gender, but just in general for that type of situation. So thank you. I think one of the things that you touched on that was interesting was this idea of self-advocacy. And I think a lot of our attendees tonight are probably thinking about, how can I combat the dreaded, both the term and the experience of imposter syndrome? How can I build my confidence? How can I kind of make space for myself in a space that maybe I don't see people who look like me so much? So what advice would you guys on the panel have for helping people build that confidence and advocate for themselves? Wondering, Teresa, if you want to start us off on this one.
So I feel like in my career, I have always known a lot more than I thought I did. And I think that's true of a lot of people. Especially, I think, as a woman. I feel like a lot of times generalities, men are always applauded and said, go get this, do that. whereas women are not given the same cheering section a lot of times. And so I really did feel like I never knew as much as maybe the same men in my class or in my working environment, even though I did. It always turned out that I knew as much, if not more. And I think you just have to convince yourself that you do. My college roommate, who I still am in touch with, every project we started ever, she was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Where she did. It was her own, she was telling herself that she didn't know what she was doing when she knew good and well. And in this day and age, none of us know how to jump right in and code anything. There's just too many technologies. There's just too much going on. Everybody has to look at the answers. Everybody has to figure out what they're doing. But we all know how to problem solve. I think that's what we know how to do as software engineers, as developers. Problem solving is our gift. That was one of the things I was going to say with the last question is when you are career switching, presenting yourself as a problem solver. I mean, we can all learn syntax. I mean, that's not the hard part. It's how to tackle the problem, how to solve the problem. And a very quick little anecdote when both Annie and Diana were talking. When I first hired on, there weren't enough computer science people to hire. We hired both music and math majors. Those were our two fallback positions because I think the brain works the same. So and it worked out great. A little training because you've got the same. I don't know what it is, but there's something to it. I forgot what the question was. I've gone off.
Me too, but I loved your answer.
So basically, you can do it. I think as a woman, just tell yourself you are worthy. You know what to do.
Yes, I think that's definitely the advice that I would take away from that. Keep reminding yourself of that. I'm wondering if maybe Annie, as you're addressing this question too, about how do you build confidence and make space for yourself in this industry. What advice do you have for kind of supporting yourself and advocating for yourself, but also building kind of a community so that you're not in it alone, but maybe you have a community of people around you, like Teresa and her roommate were probably telling each other, you can do it. What advice do you have for people for doing that?
Yeah, I think, part of it is, I guess one thing I like to say when imposter syndrome comes up, especially in this industry, is that your greatest asset is never what you know. It's your ability to figure out what to learn next and learn it. And exactly like Teresa was saying, it's problem solving. So when you're new in an industry, like that feeling like, oh, I don't know enough, like I shouldn't be here. Like instead of channeling that into that feeling of I don't know enough, it's probably true. Like most of the time, like if I know what to do, I do it. And then I'll go on to the next problem. So you're going to spend most of your time in that space of like, I actually don't know how to do this. I'm trying to figure it out right now. So that feeling of like, I don't know enough. I don't belong here. Don't channel that into I don't belong here. Channel that into, okay, I'm gonna know more. Like, what do I need to know next? Like, how do I get there? And because that's what a lot of this job is learning the next thing. So whether you have a ton of experience programming or not, you can try to channel that feeling of I don't know enough into like, okay, great. Like, what's the next problem? Like, what's next? I'm gonna do that. And I think that's like, at least for me, has been like a much like healthier direction for that feeling. It's not, I should already know it. It's like, I'm gonna, like, I can know it. I'm gonna figure it out. And I think if you can sort of get used to that feeling and then learn how to channel it into like leveling up or learning something new, and sometimes you will be in a room or on a team where everyone does know more than you. And like, those have been the best parts of my career because I like got to learn from all those people. And I think Diana said something a bit about like getting hired because she said like, I don't know. I'm excited to learn. That's like my hands down, my biggest piece of advice for someone that's career switching. Cause I did do that. I came in, from nonprofit worlds, knowing basically nothing. yeah, that's like my biggest piece of advice is say like, no, I don't know that, but I'm really excited to learn it. And like, this seems like that first, getting your first job is awful. It's the hardest one, I promise. But yeah, like that attitude of like, yeah, like I don't know a lot, but I really love learning what I've learned so far. And you guys do this, and I'm really, really excited to learn this thing from you all. That attitude is like what a lot of times what people are looking for in newer either career switchers or junior level employees. It's the like, I know that I'm just starting and I'm excited to like learn with like from you. So like I'm sort of just rambling, but like to me that's like all wrapped up together is like imposter syndrome and trying to figure out how to career switch and getting a job and kind of that whole and confidence. Like the biggest piece of confidence you need is not like, I know more than everyone in this room. You might, and like sometimes that's cool, but like the biggest piece of confidence you need is that you'll be able to learn and figure out whatever is next. Because that's going to make you good at any job, right? It's going to take you from not knowing how to do it to knowing how to do it. So I'd say like as confidence goes, that's the piece that will sort of get you through even the hard situations, and the harder moments.
Cool, thank you. In the same vein of kind of self-advocacy, supporting yourself, supporting others, I want to continue in the vein of kind of this concept of allyship. And I'm wondering, Elliot, if you could talk a little bit about what it has meant to you, or maybe experiences you've had with allies in the workplace. What have they done that was supportive for you? How did they lift you up along the way? What was helpful? If you'd like to touch on things that maybe people thought were helpful and weren't so helpful, feel free. But what support has been valuable to you from allies, so that, the people in this room can understand what they can do to be allies as well?
Yeah, so I think an important factor here is intersectionality. And there's this exercise I went through at a previous company for DEI training called the Powder Flower, which I talk about all the time. And it helps us to acknowledge areas where we have privilege and areas where we don't. And often even white cis men in the room will have areas where they have experienced being in some kind of minority, whether it's socioeconomic background or education, age, that sort of thing. And so being able to recognize where your areas of privilege are and where they aren't can help from an intersectionality standpoint of, I recognize that I'm a white person, and that always trumps any of my identity as a gender minority. And so understanding how that plays into everything, and myself as being an ally. And I think, having a mindset of always learning is really important. There's no checking the boxes of allyship and learning all the things. It's a continual process, as well as things just change all the time. So even if you have learned or read everything on the internet about something, only a matter of days and that thing will have changed. So always learning, and self-educating is really important, because minorities of all different areas have to do a lot of emotional labor often to educate people around them. And so the more you can kind of self-educate and recognize, oh, this is something I don't know about, rather than asking someone who is a minority in that area, why don't I do the labor to go find resources and educate myself? I think that's very important. And then just always coming in with no assumptions, ask questions, and recognize not being the expert in the room in that area, and leaving your ego behind, right? Because that can cause us to be very defensive and want to say, no, I'm a good person and this is making me feel guilty, right? And so yeah, those are some tips I have for allyship in all different ways, whether that's gender, race, etc. And yeah, specifically for myself as a non-binary person, right, it comes up a lot of using pronouns and not dead naming people and that sort of thing. And I think the same guidelines apply to that. Like, never assume someone's gender or someone's pronouns. Try not to other people for whatever, minority factors they may have. I've been in a lot of rooms of like someone not asking pronouns until they realize a non-binary person is there. And then it's like, oh, what are your pronouns, right? So yeah, I think just having awareness, always educating yourself and not making assumptions.
Yeah, that I know you said there's no checklist, but that definitely seems like a great starting point of bullet points to at least keep in mind. So thank you for that very detailed answer. I appreciate that. Diana, I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about your experience with support that you've received. Who have you seen as an ally or a supporter or an advocate in your experience in our industry?
I have to think on that a little bit, but I'll just echo some things that Elliot said about being a good ally. I just wanted to reiterate the you will make mistakes part, and you have to be able to recover from that and learn from it and be a better person and not get defensive if it makes you feel like, no, this isn't who I am. It just be proud that you're not that person that you did not want to be perceived as. It's and move on and educate yourself. As far as who I feel like has helped me, I actually don't really identify with much. I think for me, because I worked in jobs that were either where I was either like in the gender minority or organizations were so small that, or the job role was very isolating. I just felt isolated in general. And at first I thought this is what I preferred. But once I really started to open up and talk to other women, other Asian people, other career changers, just find your affinity groups, and then you realize there's so much you're holding in that you don't realize that you're holding in until that moment. And you're like, oh, wait, I have all these things I need to vent about. And so I think just having, finding a support network has been really helpful. And at least at my job, like my mentors are male, but they identify with my rambling nature. And I think they also thought that was something they should bring to the team. And so they just reassure me it's okay. Like it's not bad. It's not anything. Like just be you, and and that's what we appreciate about you. So I think just kind of generally making people feel included and accepted has made a difference for me. By people, I mean me.
Yeah, I think that's great. You kind of talked about finding your community, finding your affinity groups, whoever that group of people is that maybe you have a shared experience or, some shared traits that you can just kind of coalesce yourselves around. I think that can always be really helpful. I wanted to shift a little bit to talking about kind of industry trends or policies that the folks on the panel have heard or seen in practice. So Teresa, I'm wondering if you can start us off with telling us a little bit about, over the course of your career, how have you seen policies change? Elliot told us a little bit about this training that offered some, helpful insights. And I know that a lot of companies do things like that and a lot don't. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about your experience with training and policies in the workplace around gender, and maybe if you've noticed shifts in that over time.
Okay, I'll have to think about this a minute. So tell you what, Annie, are you ready to answer this one? And then let me think about this a minute. I'm going to throw it to Annie, but I'll take it back. I was
going to throw it to Annie next. So Annie, if you want to tell us a little bit about, yeah.
Sorry, tell you a little bit about.
So the question is kind of about, policies or trainings that you've seen, and maybe if you've seen different things in place at different places, what's worked well, what hasn't worked so well in terms of policies designed to support women and gender minorities. And some things that come to mind are, maternal, paternal family leave, training opportunities in the workplace, things like gendered restrooms, locker rooms, you know, all those policies that kind of come together to create or not create a supportive and affirming workplace.
Awesome. Yeah, cool. I wasn't sure if it was like over the course or like examples.
Yeah.
I think, well, if you like, for just like personally, if there's something that could have made like my experience better, more family leave more parental leave that would have been it. Like, that's the deal breaker for me. There was like a minute I was going to quit. It was like having my second kid and was just like, I don't know. Like, it's just tough to go back as early as I had to. So from like if there was one thing that like for me personally would have like made my career easier, that would be it. Even if it wasn't all, I don't care honestly as much about paid leave as I do about length of leave. I think, but for other people it's the opposite. But I just think for a lot of time for women and for having a family, like for men and for everyone, like your family is changing a lot. It's going to take a lot out of you and take a lot of your time, and trying to balance all that is really hard. I will say, like, in the 10 years I've been in the industry, I've seen a lot of improvement, yeah, and especially a lot more equity in terms of like parental leave not being particularly tied to gender, which I think is amazing for a lot of reasons. So that's my like, doesn't apply to everybody, but matters a lot to some people, and I'd like to hop on that.
It's interesting you say that, because I feel like I was very fortunate I worked for Lockheed Martin. My children are 26 to 34. And I was able to take off, not paid, of course. I was able to take 3 months, 2 to 3 months off paid, but then as long as I wanted, and it was really not an issue. And then I worked part-time with full benefits. So I felt like I came out very well. But I felt like that was kind of changing in the industry. Do you not see that? I was fortunate, especially at the time that I was having my children. But do you not think that it's still changing? It doesn't sound like it from your perspective.
I think it is still changing, and changing for the better. I think we're making a lot of progress, and I think leave for everybody is really important. But in my case, I could have taken longer. That I would have lost all my benefits, and my family is all on all of our benefits, and so
Right.
12 weeks, and that was like the end. And there was sort of like, yeah, so I couldn't have really done anything much differently than then. But that just happened to be like my family situation. But I just think, like, yeah, it's and like more leave for, yeah, parents and people of all kind of caregivers. I think like just like a little more leeway in the system would go a really, really long way. In addition to that, though, I think like things like this are a thing that I've seen more and more of. So more programs really targeted, kind of talking about, I don't know, I think stuff like this really matters. I think just like being in a room and seeing a bunch of people kind of all thinking about this the same way, or even just talking about different experiences. I think this stuff, I don't know, I think programs like this make a really big difference. I did a lot of work with Railsbridge for a while, and there were some other organizations, and all of them, I just think, bring really good people together and encourage people to get through like the hardest pieces of it. So I'd say the thing that I've like kind of found very heartening is when I first was getting into the industry, I was looking around like, okay, like I guess I just write some code and then hope somebody hires me. Like I did a boot camp, but that was like very early boot camp. So I was like, my friends were like, I've never heard of this. You're crazy. And now I've seen a lot more kind of things like this where, like you all were saying, like find your affinity groups, like find kind of support networks and lean into that. So seeing more of this, I think is really, really good for the industry. So sort of those are the two things I can think that I've seen that I don't know, I think a lot about, and I think make a big difference.
Yeah, well, thank you to all of our panelists for the experiences and the input that you shared. This conversation absolutely flew by, but I really loved hearing everything that everybody shared. I will note that we just got a couple of questions in. One of them was asking about what are the contributing factors to the decrease in the percentage of women who have pursued computer science after the class of '84. I think that's a wonderful question, and it's one that we could probably talk about for 5 more hours, and I would love to do that. But instead, we are going to head into our breakout rooms because we're going to break out into some smaller groups. Elliot's going to take us through an introduction to that activity. But I'll also just close out the panel discussion by saying, you know, looking through the questions that people were interested in hearing about, a lot of them did have to do with policies, what are the trends in the industry, things like that. And so I don't want to put our panelists on the spot any more than I already have by asking you for, you know, facts that you might not necessarily be able to rattle off, although Elliot sure did. So thank you for that. But I would encourage everybody to, after this event is over, continue to read, do your research, learn, talk to people, hear about what's going on in the industry, hear about what other people beyond just those of us on this call are, you know, doing and hearing and talking about. And let's all continue to educate ourselves.